so much for watching. I am joined by Andy Romanoff, who has an amazing history with a lot of awesome stories to tell. And speaking of stories, his book is available for purchase. It's titled Stories I've Been Meaning to Tell You. So, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, and I love, you know, some people are storytellers, and like that is like you have many gifts, but to me, just from going through your book and your videos, like that is one of your true gifts. And I know that if anybody, when they read your book, and if they have read your book, they'll know that your life is so filled with so many just experiences and stories. So if we're talking about who you are and your background, what would you want readers and just people in general to know about you?
Oh boy. Well,
Big question.
well, so so I have led a very unlikely life. I think that's probably you got to start there. I've led a very unlikely life. I went completely off the rails. My father died when I was 7. I went off the rails. I became unteachable. I became ungovernable. And for the next, 25 or 30 years, I got myself into a significant amount of trouble. I didn't kill anybody, but I stole. I did 100 things. Um, and then slowly and through a combination of just getting older and therapy after I almost died a couple of times from drug, craziness. Um, Slowly I started to pull my life together, and then along the way I started businesses, and I uh, became senior EVP of technical marketing and strategy for then the most respected camera company in the world. And I was married and I had children, and I learned a little bit from it.
Yeah.
And and I tried to look, the last thing in the world that I wanted to do was to write one of those, and then I got to be a big guy kind of thing. I love telling the bad boy stories. I never set out to write a book.
Yeah.
I set out to write short stories. And people would say to me, Andy, you really ought to write a book. I love your voice. I really love your stories. And I would say, no, man, I got a short story. My wife is the writer. My daughter is the writer. They can do big narrative arc, all that kind of stuff. And after about 5 years of writing short stories, one day I woke up and I said, I got 60 or 70 of these things. They kind of could fit together to be a book. And then I began that.
And like you mentioned, like you don't want to your story doesn't fit into that box of like, oh, and then I became big time. Like you do love to tell those, like you mentioned, as like troubled and troubling times. And if you look into like your book and the content you put out in the world, there are just it's been a wild ride. There's some great stories, and a lot of it really stuck with me. And from your journeys, like with the hog farm in the 70s and 80s, like how would you just from the 60s, 70s, 80s, like how would you describe life in those eras? It was like to me, reading about him, like it was like almost like the Wild West in a way. Like it was fascinating.
um, so the first thing is I'm old enough. I'm about to be 82, and I'm old enough to kind of be between beatnik and hippie. And I really experienced life that way. I was a troublemaker. I hung out on corners. Somebody once said to me that the way you should pitch your book is this is a book for kids who hang out on corners looking for something to do. Because I was that kid hanging out in a corner looking for something to do. And I got into a lot of trouble that way. And then it was the late 60s and the 70s. And then after a disastrous marriage and living in London, I came back to Chicago, where I was from, and met the hog farm, the commune that did the trips tents and the free kitchens at Woodstock. And I became a member of the hog farm. And then for a year, I lived on buses and traveled across the country and hung out with Ken Kesey and started breathing nitrous oxide and became known as Captain Gas, and so on and so on.
But like what's amazing is, so much of that is a part of like your story, which became your success. How do you describe like the process of learning and growing and like going from just almost a lost soul in a way to someone who's become a very successful and like very just a person that people want to learn from and kind of follow.
Joe, I really want to answer that question, and I'm not sure. I mean, I know I was enormously lucky. I know that there were just too many chances to have terrible things happen, and I escaped over and over and over again until I was old enough to see, that I had done that life and I was done with that life, and to begin to figure it out. Um, so I wish I had, I wish I had advice that I could easily give. So if you would only do this,
Yeah.
but in fact, I have a kind of a different message, and my message is you got to get out in the world. That if no, some people are really happy to live a different kind of life. Some people can grow up, go to school, learn things from others, and find a career. All of them. I'm not saying without any trouble at all. We all go through life with trouble. I, if I have anything to say, it's to people who don't have those things, who have been struggling, looking for, you know, what the hell they're going to do. And the message is that you just got to do it, even if you don't know what it is. And you got to get up in the morning and go out the door
Yeah.
and see what the world wants, see if you can't find where you and the world fit together.
And I think that's beautifully said. And, there is this like, desire for so many people to do and achieve and do. And it's intimidating. And I think if you just, to me, in my experience, in my lifetime, I've found that the less I try to do and the more I'm just kind of being myself in the world, things kind of fall into place. And I think that for you really, played out throughout so many of so many of the years that you write about, so many years that you were just kind of putting yourself out there into the world.
Well, I sure didn't start out intending any.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the big advantages of really not paying attention is that, crazy things can happen,
Hmm.
because you're not afraid until it's way too late.
Yeah.
And so I wandered into thing after thing. And I'm not saying everybody should do that. My God, if you can figure out an easier way to do this, do it.
Yeah.
But I did do it that way. And I think where it gets interesting, and it's the part that I probably have to do some more writing about, is where you begin to make life choices on a conscious basis.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
you know,
one of the things that you write about a lot and like you've touched on is just this theme of, living a full and a meaningful life. So another big question coming your way, but when you think about a meaningful life,
ah,
what does that really mean to you?
yeah, to have companionship with someone who loves you, to raise children if that's part of your desires, to be part of a community, and to do meaningful work, to find things that, reasons you want to get up in the morning.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think it's such a I think knowing too, like, just from what I learned from your book and from you is that the path is not linear. It's it is not linear by any means, and you shouldn't expect it to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what makes your book, so interesting is it's all these pieces. And like for you, what was the process like of kind of like, you said you never intended to write a straight up memoir. So what was the process like of bringing it all together into a book?
Okay. So a couple of things. And the first one is, um, I, and I talk about this a little bit in the book. Um, one of the things that I could write bad boy stories all day long.
Hmm.
What I was kind of shocked to discover, as you know, you read it, is that some of the book isn't about me at all. Some of the book is about friends who died along the way, who I thought, you know, I wanted to memorialize them, and I wanted to tell their stories in a way that other people would find interesting. So so that's a piece of it. Is the was to see that there was that as well. I'm not sure that I'm answering your question, Howard, but if you give me just repeat it just a little bit and
No, I think it does. I was just mostly curious of just for you, the actual, like, was it a challenge to kind of put all of these stories, everything together into one book? And I think maybe
ah
that's
ah
something too, like you might need to write another book.
ah. So once I knew that I had, a bunch of stories, I knew that I didn't quite know what to do with it. I tried to imagine how they could all fit together. No, I'm not really. That's not going to come so easily. And so I found an editor to work with, and that was an important moment. I found a woman named Amy Bookman, and Amy read the story. She read every one of the stories, and after that, she said, "Yeah, I think you do have a book here,
Mhm.
and I think we can figure this out together." And we spent almost a year um, in structuring that. And I wrote new material because there was once we found a structure for it, then it became clear that not it needed some more stuff. It needed interstitial things. It needed bits and pieces to explain why it went from here to here. So the book is kind of nonlinear, and and tries to to say a lot of things. I mean, it is a memoir. It does tell the story of my life, but it doesn't tell the story of my whole life. And it tells the stories of others. And there's ruminations about life and death and what's important. You
Yeah.
know, that took a year to put together with an editor.
Okay. And one thing, like I work obviously in with Book Baby, like like independent authors, independent publishing, and with your book being so personal and being so specific to you, like I work with a lot of authors like yourself who remaining independent makes it so much easier to tell that story. Was there any for you, like just in terms of remaining independent, like how was that like an advantage to you when it comes to telling your story?
Because I didn't think of myself as an author with a message to begin with.
Hmm.
I was just writing stories. I was just telling stuff. And then when this began to happen, one of the things that becomes obvious as you go on is if you want to publish a book, if you want to do more than write a book, you have to turn to publishing a book. And that's when I spent a year, looking for representation, looking for a traditional publisher. And along the way, what I learned was that my story was not likely to be of interest to those kinds of people. It wasn't that it wasn't well told. Over and over again, I had people say to me, "Your book is wonderful. I love your stories. It doesn't fit into the mold."
Hmm.
And so that was the point at which I began to understand that it was going to be on me to publish it myself. And by publishing it myself, I have a friend who's a book designer. And he offered me, he said, "Andy, I'll design your book for you." He said, "And I can have it published by a Chinese publisher, and you can get thousands of books for not a lot of money." Um, and I thought about that, and I asked other people who had gone that route, And I discovered that what happened was you ended up with a pallet of books in your garage if you had a garage, or in your closet if
Yeah.
you were living someplace smaller. I said, I don't want a pallet of books. And the other thing I learned was that there's actually three pieces to this. You write the book, you publish the book, and then you have to distribute the book. And that was the one that I hadn't even imagined. And so as I began to explore, I discovered BookBaby, and I discovered the concept of a place where you could not only, get the book printed, do all of the million things of publishing. I mean, when I talk to people about publishing now, and I start saying, okay, let's just start with ISBN numbers, and let's just talk about the difference in ebook files, and this and this and this and this. And everybody's kind of shocked because they think when they've got a PDF of the finished book, they're done, but they're not. And I really needed somebody to help me get through that. And then when you've printed the book, how is it in the world? Unless it's just for your friends, how is it in the world in a way that people can see it? So I found that page, the BookBaby authors page, I found to be just useful and wonderful. And I use it all the time. I use it to announce upcoming events and, put in videos of things that I've done and stuff like that. So that.
Yeah, and it's great to hear that. And the game, really has changed for authors. There's because of obviously like the work we do here and just the way the industry is shifting is it becoming in like you could be independent and have your book everywhere that every other book is, and it's not so the game is changing, and I think it's benefiting a lot of authors, and it's exciting, and it's gonna continue. So I love to hear that, and I appreciate your kind words about working with us. And my one, did you learn, you learned a lot along the way in your own life. Did you learn anything along the way of this book publishing process? Is a one
Yeah, well, some of it I've just told you. I
yeah.
learned, I I've thought about making a checklist because I have been. I just spoke to an authors group a month ago or something like that. Because I'll tell you a thing I've learned. Everybody wants to talk to me about self-publishing.
Oh,
I
really?
I I host a luncheon for a company once a month, and one of the luncheons was yesterday. And somebody said, Andy, can we talk for a minute? I really want to talk to you about self-publishing. Sure, of course. And sat down, and it turned out a young guy, a guy in his 30s. Uh, but he said, my dad has written a book, and I really want to help him publish it. And I know he's never going to find a traditional publisher for it. And tell me about the self-publishing process. So we sat there for 10 minutes and talked about it. The game has changed. If you have set out to write a bestseller in a genre that the book publishers have understood, and that they see they can make the kind of money that will keep their operation alive, then sure, go with God. See if you
Yeah.
can't find a way to do that. If you're not sure about it, spend 6 months or a year, discover for yourself. But sooner or later, put the work out in the world.
Yeah.
That's the message that I have for people when I'm talking to them. Put the work in the world. You will enjoy it so much. Holding up a book
Yeah.
and saying, this is my book. Let me read you this story from the book. And you only
Yeah.
get to do that when this thing is done.
That's true. And I think it's great advice because a lot of people are at that point where they're like, I have this, I just don't know what to do with it. And just get it out
Yeah,
there. Get it out
yeah.
there.
And it's a crapshoot, it
Yeah.
is there's no question um, that so one of the things that I wanted was to break even. I didn't need to make money, I had no visions of then the money will be pouring in, I'll be getting these checks, I'll be sitting at the dining room table, the servers will bring in my meal. You
Yeah.
know? That wasn't going to happen, and I knew that. But I didn't want to just spend money and pour it down a rabbit hole and have nothing for it. I wanted the book to be read. And
Mhm.
so that's another thing that I think is important is, that you guys um, have a way of working within a budget that I like. Um, in my case, I was able to pick and choose because there were some services that I really desperately needed. There were pieces of this thing I didn't even understand when I started. Um, but there were others that I was perfectly capable of doing, with friends and family and stuff. So I arrived with my line edits done, and I arrived with many of the pieces of the book creation stuff done. But oh boy, then there was the part of making the book,
Yeah.
and then there's the part of selling the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now it's out there. And I'll make sure to have in this interview every link where people could purchase it, learn more about you. And also in relation to learning more about you, I'm curious to know, like, are you scheming another book? What other kind of projects do you have up your sleeve?
I spent the first sort of 6 months or 8 months after having written the book saying, no, I am never writing another. And not because I was a horrible thing or anything. It was just like, I've told the story. I'm done with this now.
Hmm.
But lately, I've been thinking, oh God, I never talked about that. I mean, I don't tell stories just for the telling of them, I've discovered. I tell them because there's something in them that is worth knowing, or at least there was something that was worth knowing, something where I learned something. Um, and I've begun to see that there are some stories I haven't told that might be cool to tell. So I don't know, maybe.
Well, no, we'll have everybody on the edge of their seat waiting. So. Well, Andy, I don't have any other questions for you. I really appreciate your time. And again, Andy's book is called Stories I've Been Meaning to Tell You. It's available for purchase on Book Baby Bookshop, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, anywhere you buy books. Andy, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
I want to just toss one thing in
Of
because
course.
yes, it is available in all those places, but it's only available as an ebook everywhere except Book Baby.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. The reason I only sell the book on Book Baby is because only by selling it on Book Baby do I have a chance to recover the costs of making it. Because the others take so much a percentage of it that, I mean, it's a labor of love, but, but you don't make anything. And
Yep.
so in terms of supporting authors, if you want a paper copy of the book, Book Baby.
That's right. Book Baby Bookshop, we pay the highest royalty rates in the industry. So all about supporting independent authors and kind of changing the game. That's our goal.
Yep.
All right, Andy, thank you so much. This has been great. Appreciate your time. We'll talk soon.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure for me as well.